So somewhere this week, a client sat down at a laptop, opened a search bar, and typed in 4 words. Is my therapist using AI? So I want you to sit with that for a second. Not a journalist, not a regulator, a client, somebody who you might be seeing on a Thursday afternoon. Because that question, that might make you feel a little bit anxious, but it's a perfectly reasonable question. And it's arriving in our profession whether we are prepared for it or not. Most of us aren't prepared for it. However, a recent survey by BACP shows around 38% of counsellors are already using AI in some form in their work. And those are just the ones that are admitting to it because for some reason using AI as a therapist seems to bring a whole lot of shade with it. So that's what this video is about today. It's not a video about discussing whether AI is good or bad, whether you should be using it or not using it. It's more the quieter question that is sitting underneath all of the noise is what do we owe our clients about the tools behind the work that we are doing? How can we answer it honestly? And how can we answer it in a way that deepens the trust rather than denting it? And there's a reason why right now is the moment to really think it through. We already have now some solid information to anchor it into, which is the new BACP Ethical Framework that was just released about a week ago now. And for people who are BACP members, the guidelines in that are going to be compulsory by the 3rd of November. But at least now we have a framework that we can refer to and think about how we are using or communicating AI with our clients. There's another reason why it's really important to be having these conversations now, because AI and mental health and communication about it is mainstream. It is everywhere. We obviously know of some of the really distressing, horrific cases that have happened in the US with individuals engaging in AI chatbots and the impact that it had on them in terms of people ending their life following conversations with AI. And most recently, legislation is starting to come out to ban therapy chatbots in places like the US as well. What it is meaning, though, is that conversations about AI and mental health are mainstream. People are using it regardless of what your personal thoughts are. And it also means that people are more literate in terms of the language that they use around mental health and have more awareness and more knowledge around things like data protection and where their information is going to. And that's not paranoia. That's a perfectly reasonable person paying attention. So it might be that your clients start to ask these questions of you. And in our profession, you might be engaging in using AI and maybe not even aware that AI is present in some of the hardware that you're using. We know it with things like AI transcribers and note takers, but AI is filtered into many of the tools that we're using every day and perhaps not even recognizing that it is embedded in there. So that's what today's video is going to be about. And I just want to be clear as well that although our clients may be asking these questions about our use of AI, that it's not necessary, it's not a complaint, it's not an attack. They're taking an interest in their own information and in their own safety. And that willingness to ask, to check, to want to understand what's happening to them, that is a client who is engaged. A client who asks is a client who is engaged. So the goal today isn't to help you try and deflect from that question. It's to help you become someone who can answer that question really well without scrambling or stumbling or knowing what to say. And the framework from the BACP is going to help you then with some guidance around the decisions that you're going to make around your own use or your own communication about AI use. So the BACP has spent around 4 years reviewing the previous framework. It has just recently launched the new one, and it will become mandatory by November 2026. And for the first time, AI and digital technology is mentioned explicitly in there. So at the heart of the guidelines that are in the new framework, it really asks that as a therapist that you assess the risk of any AI tool, any digital tool, or any online platform before you use it. So not after something goes wrong, but before. So there is a new expectation that you are assessing the risk, and rather than getting pulled into shiny tool syndrome, which I am a classic shiny tool syndrome person, unfortunately. So I have had to rein it in and think more carefully about tools that I'm engaging with and how it might be used and how information might be processed. So the guidance is that you shouldn't be using AI in a therapeutic context unless you have three things in place: appropriate training, appropriate insurance, and informed consent from your client. And I think the last one is probably the most important. So it asks you to do a risk assessment and to actually test the tool before you use it with a real person. It asks you to have a plan for what happens if it goes wrong, if the client withdraws their consent, or if you can no longer use the tool. It talks about you and the client having equal access to what's being used, and it's clear that you need to know and to be able to explain how anything sensitive or identifying is stored. So important. So that informed consent bit and that conversation with your client is crucial. And then there's a line, honestly, that does most of the work. Don't upload identifying information into a general AI system. If you take anything from this episode today, it is that. And by general AI system, I'm talking about things like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. Do not upload anything identifiable into those platforms about your client. And although I'm talking today about BACP, there will be new charters coming out from other professional bodies, I'm sure, around their ethical frameworks and in particular AI and mental health. So one of the most important things that is clear throughout the entire framework is that accountability stays with you, not with the tool. If the tool messes up, it's not the tool's fault. There is no one to blame there. That you, as the therapist, as the data controller, that responsibility lies with you, which is why it is imperative that you are both assessing the risk around certain tools and the use before you use them, but also that you are completely transparent with your client around how you are using them. So, do you use AI is a question that people can often think is a really clear, concise answer to, but there's lots of different dimensions of AI because it can show up realistically in different places in your private practice, from high stakes, where you do need to have client consent and have that conversation, to maybe lower stakes. So if we think about high stakes, first of all, that is going to be things like note taking, like I've already mentioned, whether that is a transcriber that listens to your conversation with clients and then uploads it into your notes, or that you're auto dictating a summary of the conversation and it's tidying up the conversation for you to then put into your practice management software, for example. So that's probably the highest risk use of AI that we can think about in our practices. And again, it's not saying that you cannot use these things, but you want to clearly assess the risks associated with using it. You want to have a look at things like what their policy is around how information is used, processed, and how it is stored, and then ensure that you have your client's consent in that. Another step down from that might be things like drafting materials, so personalized resources, psychoeducation handout, or drafting even an email to your client. That if there's no identifying client information in what you type, that the risk of that does drop down. But again, you need to be really thorough about where is the line and around what is transparency of how a client could be identified and what makes it really clear that they cannot be identified in that. So I think a thing here is that you are always ensuring that you are checking the output of anything you're using AI for. And then another step down from that might be more for your marketing activities to help you write maybe social media captions, to help you draft content for your website, or to help you write a blog. Generally in those things, there's going to be nothing that you need to disclose, but you still want to make sure that it's your voice and that it's actually your thoughts and your opinions that you're sharing, but you're using AI maybe to refine it. And then there's a final potential, and that is in you recommending AI apps or chatbots to clients between sessions. The second that you recommend something, you have taken share of the responsibility for what you have sent them into. So again, that would be something that you would want to be assessing to see if there's any risks associated with that before you recommend anything. So your simple question is, does any client identifiable information touch this tool? And if the answer is yes, that you're in the world of explicit consent and risk assessment and data storage. And if the answer is no, then generally it'd be fine and you're leaving it to your own professional judgment. So when we're talking about AI, I'll often hear therapists kind of say, I don't use AI, I don't let it touch my practice. But like I mentioned, it's embedded in so many tools here that we do need to give this consideration. And so I want to talk about two mistakes that I often see therapists engage in, because it often pulls them in opposite directions and can really get in the way of doing this well when it comes to AI communication. So the first mistake is that we want to be so transparent and we want to disclose everything, and we absolutely overwhelm our client with information, and we detail every platform we use, every vendor, every data path, retention policy, opt-out mechanism, and we give them a whole wall of detail that will mean possibly absolutely nothing to them. So when we think about informed consent, basically the client needs to understand simply and clearly how their information is being used. And so that doesn't mean that we have to over disclose. That doesn't actually protect the client. If anything, it just confuses them. We want to explain in simple, clear language how you're using the information and explain it simply. The second mistake then, like I've mentioned about therapists who feel shame about the fact that they use AI, that it might be that you avoid it altogether, avoid having the conversation around it, or that perhaps you aren't even recognizing that there are potentially some implications in the way that you're using AI and risks associated with that for the client, especially risks around trust. And so if you're avoiding it altogether in not disclosing or not talking about it, then that isn't a great thing either. So we want to find this place in the middle where we have transparency, we have openness around our use of AI, but that we're explaining it in a way that is simple, that is clear, and that your clients can easily understand, and that they can make an informed decision then about whether they consent to your use of it in your particular way or they don't. So here's 5 things that you can think about when it comes to assessing your own use of AI and how you make decisions around what you communicate and how you communicate with your client. So the first thing that I recommend that you do is to decide what your position is before a client even asks you. This is the single most useful thing that you can do, is to actually sit down and look at all the digital technology that you are using in your practice and see, is AI embedded in any way, shape, or form in these platforms, and does it touch any client information? And if it does touch client information, what is a plain English sentence that I can use to explain how and why it is used? The second thing then is to match the disclosure to the tool. So this is where the earlier test about the different stakes pays off. So we mentioned about like the ambient note taker that handles client material, that absolutely needs real consent conversation. And ideally that needs to be in your contract and in your privacy notice as well, because that does genuinely affect your client. If your AI is just purely for background admin or for your marketing, it doesn't necessarily need a disclosure, and you can make your own professional judgment around that's something that you want to discuss with them. So we're looking at the proportionality of the risk to your client. So high stakes always needs conversation and needs informed consent. The third thing then is to have plain language wording ready. So we don't want technical jargon. It could be something as simple like, I use a tool that helps me write up my notes after our sessions together. Your identifying details aren't stored in it, or they're stored in a specific way. And if you would rather I didn't, I will write them by hand instead. That is literally what your disclosure could look like, as simple as that. And that means that if a client asks you this question out of the blue, you don't need to get defensive, because it's a really good question and you can explain really calmly, directly, and clearly the answer to how you use it. The fourth thing that you want to think about is writing it down. So the framework wants you to have a considered position, to know what your position is around your AI use, a plan for it, documenting what you use, what consents you have, and what your data answer is. Does really two things at one. It meets the standard that is required of you, but it also protects you if anyone questions your judgment. So a short notice to yourself is enough. You don't have to write a whole policy paper on it. You're just leaving a trail just in case somebody comes and asks you that question, that you've got it clarified. And then the fifth thing is to have a withdrawal plan. So that is specifically what happens if a client decides that they withdraw consent and they don't want these tools being used in any way. Like, what would be your fallback to that? Usually it might be something simple. So with the AI note taker, it might be okay that you agree that you're going to take notes by hand. But it's a good idea just to think this through beforehand so that you can offer instantly and warmly a response instead of being caught out by the client. And the reframe really is the whole point, is answering this client question well. It's not a threat to your authority. It's a demonstration of exactly the things that therapy is built on: transparency, respect for someone's right to choose, the ability to be honest without getting defensive about it. So when you handle the AI question calmly, you're not just complying with a framework, that you're modeling in miniature the thing that you're there to offer. So let me bring it back to where we started, which is the BACP framework. It isn't asking you to be frightened of AI, and it isn't asking you to rush out and adopt it either. It's just asking you for one thing, that you can answer how you use the tools behind your work. And your client, whenever they type those 4 words into a search bar, is asking the same thing, just in simpler language. And so those two things, the professional standard and the human question, are both pointing in exactly the same direction, which is transparency. Transparency around everything that you are doing is always the choice that you should be making. So here are a few questions to sit with after this. So what AI, if any, touches your practice right now? And be honest, including the small stuff. Think about Zoom. Think about all the platforms that you use. Where is AI present? And does any client identifiable information come near a tool at all? And if a client asked you that forward question next week, do you have a calm, true, one-sentence answer ready? And if AI, the use of AI, transparency around anything really related to AI and therapy is something that you do want to have more information about, that you do want to stay informed around, because my goodness, the AI field and, content and information is moving so quickly. It is really easy to feel like you're behind or to feel overwhelmed by it. You are not behind, but something I do offer is a newsletter. Every fortnight, I create a newsletter that I send out to therapists that gives them in really simple, plain, easy to understand language information about what is changing in the world of AI and in what ways it might impact us in our therapy practices as well. If you're interested in signing up to that newsletter, I will pop the link in the comment section below, and I will chat to you again soon.